She had never chosen her own name on a marriage document. Someone else had signed it for her. Her pressed her trembling hand against the ink and called it done. Now Eliza Pruitt stood at the edge of the Montana wilderness, with nothing but the dress on her back, and a heart so shattered she had stopped counting the pieces. If you've ever been told your life belongs to someone else, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel. Follow Eliza's journey all the way to the end, and drop the name of your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach didn't slow down the way it should have. It lurched to a hard stop in the middle of Millhaven's main road, right there in the blazing July heat of 1879, and the jolt sent Eliza Pruitt's shoulder crashing into the wooden doorframe hard enough to leave a bruise. She didn't cry out. She had learned a long time ago that crying out only made things worse. She pressed her fingers against the small iron handle, drew one breath, and stepped down onto Montana soil for the first time in her life. The sun hit her like a judgment. 23 years old. Brown hair pinned too tight under a bonnet that wasn't hers. A dress borrowed from a woman who hadn't wanted to lend it. A traveling bag so light it might as well have been empty, because it nearly was. 3 days on a stagecoach from Cheyenne, with nothing to eat but a piece of hardtack some stranger had pitied her enough to share. And a marriage certificate folded in the inside of her left sleeve pressed against her skin like a brand. She hadn't read it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. Eliza Pruitt, aged 23. Lawfully bound to Mr. Harlan Briggs of Millhaven, Montana Territory. She had never met Harlan Briggs, never written him a letter, never chosen him or his name or his town or the life he was about to hand her, like it was nothing more than a deed to livestock. Her father had done the choosing 3 weeks ago. Franklin Pruitt had sat across the kitchen table in their cramped house in Cheyenne, folded his hands the way he always did when the conversation was already finished, and told her the arrangement had been made. "A rancher up in Montana," he'd said. "Good land, good income. He's 43, solid man. He needs a wife who'll work." Eliza had stared at her father's hands. She had wanted to say 1,000 things. She had wanted to ask why her wants didn't appear anywhere in the sentence. She had wanted to stand up and push that kitchen table sideways and walk straight out the front door and never come back. Instead, she had said, "Yes, Papa." Because what else did a woman with no money, no family beyond a father who saw her as a transaction, and no place to go, actually say, "Yes, Papa"? And here she was. Millhaven was smaller than she'd expected. One wide road bisecting a scatter of buildings, a general store, a sheriff's office, a saloon, already humming in the afternoon, a church with a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left, as if it too had grown tired of standing straight. A few horses tied to posts. A dog asleep in a thin slice of shade. 2 women on the far side of the road who had already stopped walking to stare at her. Eliza stood still beside the stagecoach and let them look. She was used to being looked at. She had never once gotten used to what the looking meant. The stagecoach driver, a weathered man named Pete, who had said perhaps 7 words to her across 3 days of travel, climbed down and dropped her bag in the dust beside her feet without ceremony. "This is Millhaven," he announced to no one in particular. "I can see that," Eliza said quietly. Pete glanced at her sideways. "You here for the Briggs arrangement?" The word arrangement landed somewhere in her chest, like a stone dropped into still water. Rippling outward, cold. "I am," she said. Pete made a sound that was not quite a word. He unhitched the horses with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done it 10,000 times. And then he said without looking at her, "Briggs'll be along. He usually comes on Tuesdays for supplies." "It's Tuesday," Eliza said. "Yes, it is." He walked away. She stood there in the heat. One of the women across the road, the taller one in a blue dress with a white collar, leaned toward the other and said something behind her hand. The other woman looked at Eliza with the particular expression that meant, "What a shame," and also somehow meant she brought this on herself at the exact same time. Eliza picked up her bag. She squared her shoulders inside the borrowed dress. She told herself the same thing she'd been telling herself since the stagecoach left Cheyenne. "You will survive this. You have survived everything else. You must be the Pruitt girl." The voice came from her left, She turned. The man standing at the edge of the road was not what she had pictured. She had pictured someone like her father, compact, self-satisfied, the kind of man who wore his authority in the set of his jaw. Harlan Briggs was tall and wide through the shoulders, with a gray-streaked beard and sun-damaged skin and small eyes that moved over her the way a man assesses a horse at auction. Taking inventory. Calculating worth. "I'm Eliza Pruitt," she said. She kept her voice level. It cost her something. Briggs looked at her for a long moment without speaking. His eyes moved from her face down to her shoes and back up again. The assessment was so open, so unapologetic, that she felt something rise up behind her ribs. Not quite anger, not quite shame, something sharp that she recognized from years of practice at pressing it back down. She pressed it back down. "You're smaller than I expected," Briggs said. "I'll do the work," she said. "You'll do more than work." He said it plainly, factually, as if it required no further explanation. "Come on then, I've got a wagon." He turned and walked, not waiting to see if she would follow. She followed, because what else did she do? The road out of Millhaven climbed steadily northward into hill country, the heat pressing down from a sky that offered no cloud and no mercy. Briggs drove the wagon without speaking. Eliza sat on the bench beside him with her bag between her feet and her hands folded in her lap, and watched the landscape change from flat scrubland to something greener and rougher, the kind of land that looked like it had opinions about who belonged on it. She didn't ask questions. She had learned that asking questions only led to answers she didn't want. After perhaps 20 minutes, Briggs said, "You cook?" "Yes." "So?" "Yes." "You been with a man before?" The question hit her like a slap across the face. She absorbed it. She kept her eyes on the road. "No," she said. Briggs made a sound. "Well, that's one thing your father was honest about at least." Eliza said nothing. "You'll learn what I need," he said. "I'm not an unreasonable man. You do what's expected, and we'll get on fine." What's expected? She folded her hands tighter in her lap and looked out at the mountains rising ahead of them, green and enormous and indifferent, and she thought, "I will not cry. I have already decided I will not cry." She didn't cry. The Briggs homestead was a squat, ungracious collection of buildings at the base of a long hill, a main house, a barn, a chicken coop, a small bunkhouse off to one side where Briggs informed her 2 ranch hands lived and kept to themselves. The house itself was the kind of clean that meant no woman had been in it for some time. Functional. Bare. Every surface holding exactly what it needed to hold and nothing else. He showed her the kitchen first. Then the bedroom, a single gesture toward the door, nothing more. Then he showed her a small room at the back of the house, barely larger than a closet, and said, "You'll sleep here until the wedding." She looked at the room, a narrow cot, a window the size of a book, a hook on the wall. "When is the wedding?" she asked. "Saturday," Briggs said. "Pastor Holloway comes through on Saturdays. Nothing fancy, no reason for it." He left her there. She sat on the edge of the cot and looked at the wall and listened to him move through the house. Heavy footsteps. No hesitation. A man entirely comfortable in the space he occupied, and she thought about the fact that in 4 days she would legally belong to a man who had assessed her the way he would assess livestock, and there was not one single thing she could do about it. "Yes, Papa." She pressed her palms flat against the rough blanket and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. "Take." She had been at the Briggs homestead for 2 days when she first saw the man from the neighboring ranch. She was at the well working the crank handle in the early morning before Briggs was awake, because she had learned quickly that being useful first thing in the morning was the best way to avoid his sour mood before coffee when she heard hoofbeats on the dry ground above the hill line. A single horse. Moving at a working pace, not a gallop. She looked up. The rider came over the ridge at the angle where the morning light hit first, and for a moment he was nothing but silhouette, broad-shouldered, straight-backed hat, low against the rising sun. He rode the way men who had been born on horseback rode without performance, without the self-consciousness of someone trying to look like something. The horse moved under him, like they'd had a long conversation about how to do this together. He saw her at the well. He didn't slow immediately. He kept his pace for a few more strides, and then unhurried, he pulled up about 30 yards out and pushed his hat back slightly with 2 fingers. "Morning," he said. His voice carried across the dry air without effort. Low. Steady. "Good morning," Eliza said. She set the water bucket down. "I didn't know there was another ranch nearby." "Ridge property." He nodded his head northward. "About a mile up through the pines. Name's Cade. Cade Whitmore. I didn't offer more than that. Didn't ask her name either right away. Just looked at her with eyes that were direct without being rude. The kind of looking that actually meant seeing rather than assessing. It was different enough from every other look she'd received in the past 2 days that she noticed it before she meant to. "Eliza Pruitt," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Small, not quite readable. "Pruitt," he said. "You're the woman Briggs sent for." It wasn't a question. The way he said it, careful neutral, told her he knew exactly what sent for meant. "I am," she said. Cade Whitmore looked at her for one more moment. Then he looked at the house behind her, at the closed door, at the silence of it. "You need anything," he said. "The Whitmore ridgeline starts at those pines up there. Anybody there'll point you toward the house." Then he tipped his hat a single clean gesture, turned his horse, and rode back the way he came. Eliza stood at the well for a long time after the sound of his hoofbeats had faded. She thought about what he'd said. "You need anything. Not how are you. Not congratulations on the arrangement. Not Harlan's a good man, you're lucky." None of the things the people in Millhaven had said to her when Briggs had introduced her at the general store yesterday afternoon, all of them smiling with their mouths, while their eyes said something entirely more complicated. Just, "You need anything." She picked up the water bucket and carried it back to the house. On Friday afternoon, one day before the wedding, everything she had been holding together came apart at once. She had been baking bread in the kitchen, her sleeves pushed up against the heat of the stove when Briggs came in from outside with the particular set to his jaw that she had already learned meant a conversation she wouldn't want to have. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at her. "Pastor Holloway's coming early," he said. "He'll be here tonight instead of tomorrow morning." Eliza set down the bread pan. She kept her voice steady. "Tonight." "That's what I said." Briggs walked to the table and sat down heavily. "We'll do it tonight. Get it finished." The word finished put something cold in her stomach. "I wasn't—" She stopped, started over. "I thought we'd agreed to Saturday morning. Plans change." He looked at her like she was making an unnecessary fuss. "It's one day different. What does it matter to you?" She held onto the edge of the work table with both hands and told herself firmly, the way she'd been telling herself things for the past 3 days, that she could do this. She had agreed. She had come here. She would manage. And then Briggs stood up from the table, crossed the kitchen in 4 strides, and took hold of her wrist. Not hard, not violently, just held it. His fingers wrapped around her wrist with the ease of a man who had never once considered whether he had the right. "I'm not a patient man by nature," he said. "I've been patient. You understand what I'm telling you." Eliza looked at his hand on her wrist. She looked at it for what felt like a very long time. Something she had been keeping carefully caged behind her ribs since the stagecoach left Cheyenne cracked open just slightly. Not anger. Not yet. Something older than anger. Something exhausted and raw and finished with being quiet. "Mr. Briggs," she said. Her voice came out very calm. "Remove your hand." He looked at her like she'd said something in a foreign language. "Remove your hand," she said again. "Please." He let go. More out of surprise, she thought, than compliance. He took a step back, and his expression shifted from comfortable authority into something colder and less readable. "You've got a spirit on you," he said. "I was told you were obedient." "I was told a good many things too," Eliza said quietly. Not all of them turned out to be accurate. Briggs stared at her. Then he straightened his vest and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Eliza stood at the work table and pressed both hands flat against the wood and breathed. Then she took off her apron. She folded it neatly on the table beside the bread pan. She walked to the small room at the back of the house, and she picked up her bag, still barely full, still light as a regret, and she stood in the middle of that narrow room and thought about what she was about to do. She thought about her father's kitchen table. She thought about "Yes, Papa." She thought about Cade Whitmore's voice in the early morning. "You need anything?" And then she walked out the back door of Harlan Briggs's house, and she didn't look back. The pine trees at the northern edge of the Briggs property were darker than they looked from a distance, the shade inside them immediate and cool, the ground soft with needles. Eliza walked fast. Not running, she was not going to run, she had decided that firmly, but walking with the kind of intention that comes from having made a decision and committing to it before fear has the chance to change your mind. Her bag was heavy enough to make her right shoulder ache. The sun was already tilting westward, which meant she had maybe 3 hours of full daylight. She didn't know exactly how far a mile through pines was. She hadn't had cause to measure distances through trees before. She found the fence line where Cade had said it would be a simple split rail affair, well maintained, the posts set straight and even. She climbed over it carefully, her skirt catching on the top rail so that she had to stop and tug it free with more force than she liked, and then she was on the other side. Whitmore Ridge land. She kept walking. 20 minutes later, the trees thinned, and she came out onto a long slope of open ground with a ranch spread below her. A main house considerably larger than Briggs's, a solid barn, a series of well-built corrals, and beyond that, a view of the mountains that stopped her walking entirely for one full second, simply because of the scale of it. Green and white-tipped and enormous, the kind of landscape that made every human problem feel briefly smaller. Then a dog started barking somewhere below, and the moment broke, and she started down the slope. She was maybe 100 yards from the house when the front door opened. Cade Whitmore stepped out onto the porch. He had his hat off his dark hair damp, like he'd just come from the washstand. He was holding a coffee cup in one hand. He looked up at the slope, and he saw her, a woman coming down the hillside alone with a bag in her hand, and something moved across his face that she couldn't fully read from the distance. He set the coffee cup down on the porch railing. He walked out to meet her. They met on the open ground between the pines and the house. Eliza stopped walking when he was close enough to talk to without raising her voice. Her shoulder ached. Her feet hurt. The back of her neck was sunburned from the walk through the trees where the branches didn't quite cover. She looked at him directly. "I need somewhere to be," she said. "Tonight. Possibly longer. I can work for the space. Whatever you need done on this ranch, I can learn it." Cade looked at her. At her face, then at the bag, then at her face again. "Briggs," he said. Not a question. "He moved the wedding to tonight," she said. "I left." A silence held between them for a long moment. The dog somewhere near the barn had stopped barking. The evening breeze moved through the grass around their feet. "He'll come looking," Cade said. "I expect so. Could cause problems for this ranch." "I know that," Eliza said. "I am telling you that clearly, so you understand what you'd be choosing if you let me stay. I am not going to pretend it's simple. It isn't." Cade studied her for another moment. His expression was still not cold exactly, more like a man who didn't spend energy on expressions he hadn't decided to mean. Then he said, "You hungry?" She blinked. Of all the things she'd prepared herself for him to say, that was not among them. Yes," she said. "I haven't eaten since this morning." He nodded once. He turned toward the house. "Come on then," he said over his shoulder. "I've got beans on the stove." Eliza stood on the open ground for one more second, her bag in her hand, the mountains enormous at her back, and she thought, "This is either the best decision you've ever made or the worst one." Then she followed him inside. The inside of the Whitmore house was nothing like the Briggs house. Not in the sense that it was fancier or better furnished, it wasn't particularly. But it felt lived in a way that Briggs's house didn't, with a quality of accumulated life rather than bare utility. A worn rug by the fireplace. A shelf of books above the window, real books, not just almanacs and property ledgers. A pair of work gloves on the table that looked like they'd been set down mid-thought and simply not moved yet. A coffee tin on the stove with the handle of a wooden spoon sticking out. A ranch hand, she hadn't seen before was at the table, young, maybe 19, with a face that suggested he hadn't quite finished growing into it yet. He looked up when Cade came in, and then his eyes went to Eliza, and his expression asked a question his mouth didn't form. "This is Eliza Pruitt," Cade said. He went to the stove and stirred the beans. "She'll be staying tonight, maybe more." The ranch hand, who introduced himself as Tommy, in a voice that cracked slightly on the second syllable, gave Eliza a nod that managed to be both curious and carefully polite. "There's a room at the back," Cade said. He was still facing the stove. "Last door on the left. It's got a proper bed and a window that opens. The latch on it is new." She understood without him saying it directly that he was telling her the room locked from the inside. "Thank you," she said. He ladled beans into a bowl and set it on the table in front of her without ceremony. Then he sat down across from her and picked up his own coffee cup and looked at her. "You want to tell me what happened?" he asked. "Do you need me to?" she said. He considered this. "No," he said. "Not tonight." Eliza picked up the spoon. The beans were simple and slightly oversalted, and the best thing she had eaten in 3 days. She lay awake for a long time that night in the small room at the back of the Whitmore house, listening to the ranch settle around her, the sounds of horses shifting in the corral, the creak of old wood cooling in the night air, a coyote somewhere distant doing its commentary on the dark. The latch on the door was as promised new. She thought about Harlan Briggs discovering her gone. She thought about the pastor arriving to an empty house. She thought about the document in her sleeve, the marriage certificate her father had signed, the one that named her as belonging to a man she had run from, and she reached into her sleeve and took it out and unfolded it in the dark and held it in both hands. She couldn't read it in the dark. She didn't need to. She folded it again carefully. Tomorrow there would be consequences. Briggs would come. The town would have opinions. She had nothing, no legal standing, no money of her own, no family who would take her side. All she had was the decision she'd made, and the man who hadn't asked for an explanation before he fed her and gave her a room with a lock on the door. She didn't know yet what Cade Whitmore was, but she knew what he wasn't. And for tonight, that was enough to close her eyes on. Outside, the Montana night pressed cool and enormous against the window, and somewhere up on the ridge the pines moved in a wind that smelled like summer and distance, and the particular freedom of having finally at last run in the right direction. Harlan Briggs arrived at Whitmore Ridge before the sun had fully cleared the eastern peaks. Eliza heard the hoofbeats from the back room. She had been awake already, had been awake for most of the night in truth, sitting on the edge of the bed with the marriage certificate folded in her hands, turning it over and over, the way you turn over a problem that doesn't have a clean solution. When the sound of horses reached her, her spine went straight and her hands went still, and she knew exactly who it was before she heard the voice. "Whitmore." Briggs's voice carried through the walls without difficulty. Flat. Controlled. The voice of a man who had not yet decided to be angry, but was holding it ready. "I know she's here. Send her out." Eliza set the certificate on the bed. She stood up. She smoothed her skirt with both hands, a useless gesture purely mechanical, the kind of thing the body does when the mind is deciding whether to be afraid. She decided not to be afraid. She opened the door and walked down the short hallway toward the front of the house. Cade was already on the porch. He had his arms crossed over his chest and his hat on, which meant he'd heard the horses before she had and had taken the time to be ready. Tommy was somewhere behind him, not visible but audible. The sound of him moving quietly toward the barn, probably for reasons that had nothing to do with the horses. Briggs sat on his horse at the edge of the yard, with one of his ranch hands at his shoulder. In the early morning light, his face was the particular shade of controlled fury that comes from a man who is angry about something he considers an insult to his dignity rather than his feelings. Eliza stepped out onto the porch beside Cade. Briggs's eyes went to her immediately. Something moved through them, assessment, anger calculation, and then he looked back at Cade. "This doesn't concern you," Briggs said. "She's my intended." "She came here of her own will," Cade said. His voice was entirely level. "She's a guest on this property. She's a woman who made a legal arrangement and then broke it." Briggs shifted in his saddle. Her father signed the papers. The contract is binding. A contract requires two willing parties, Cade said. A pause. Briggs looked at him the way men look at each other, when what they're really measuring is how far the other one is willing to go. Miss Pruitt, Briggs said, and now he looked at her directly. You are going to embarrass yourself and your father if you continue this. Come back with me, and we'll say nothing more about it. Eliza stepped forward to the edge of the porch. She looked at Harlan Briggs in the early morning light, and she thought about his hand on her wrist, and the word finished, and the room with a window the size of a book. No, she said. Briggs blinked, as if the word itself was foreign to him. No, she said again more clearly. I won't be coming back, Mr. Briggs. I don't intend to marry you. I understand there may be legal consequences to that, and I am willing to face them. But I won't be coming back. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Briggs's jaw tightened. He looked at Cade. You're making an enemy here, Whitmore. I've had enemies before, Cade said. I'll manage. Briggs held the look for another long moment. Then he turned his horse and rode back toward the road without another word, his ranch hand following the sound of their hoofbeats diminishing through the pines until the morning was quiet again. Eliza realized her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her sides and breathed. Cade turned and looked at her. He didn't say well done, or that was brave, or any of the things she half expected. He said, You want coffee? She almost laughed. It came out as something between a breath and a sound. Yes, she said. Yes, I really do. They went back inside. Over coffee at the kitchen table with Tommy conspicuously occupied outside, and the morning laying itself out quietly through the window, Cade said, He'll go to the sheriff. I know, Eliza said. Sheriff Pruitt in Millhaven is on decent terms with Briggs. They do business together. I figured as much. That means whatever legal ground you have, you'll need to know it clearly. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and looked at him. Do I have any? Cade was quiet for a moment. He turned his own cup in a slow circle on the tabletop. The contract your father signed, did you sign it? No. Did you agree to it verbally in front of a witness? No. My father told me it was done. I said yes to him, not to Briggs, and not in front of anyone official. Cade's expression didn't change, but something in it settled slightly. Then there's an argument to be made that the contract isn't binding on you. A woman can't be bound to a contract she didn't consent to. He paused. In theory. In theory, she repeated. Law in this territory is sometimes more about who argues it loudest, he said. And Briggs argues things loudly. She looked at him directly. Are you telling me I should leave Millhaven entirely? I'm telling you what you're up against, he said. What you do with it is your decision. She appreciated that more than she could easily say. The straightforwardness of it. No softening, no managing her, no deciding for her what she could handle knowing. I have nowhere else to go, she said. It was not a plea. It was a simple fact stated plainly because she had decided somewhere between last night and this morning that she was done pretending the facts were other than what they were. My father won't take me back. I have no money of my own. I have the skills I have and the situation I'm in, and I'd rather know what that actually is than have someone make it sound better than it is. Cade looked at her for a long moment. You're honest, he said, like it was something he'd noticed. I've found it saves time, she said. Something shifted in his face. It wasn't quite a smile. She was already beginning to understand that Cade Whitmore's face didn't go to expressions easily or without meaning, but it was adjacent to something warmer than what had been there before. I could use someone who knows how to work, he said. The ranch is short-handed. Tommy's good, but he's young and he can't manage everything. I had a woman named Mrs. Arden who handled the house and some of the outdoor work, but she moved back east in the spring to be near her daughter. Eliza set down her coffee cup. What would the work involve? Whatever needs doing. Cooking, keeping the house, helping with livestock in calving season, mending gear when needed. Hard work, early mornings. I can do all of that, she said. You said you'd never been on a ranch before. I said I could learn, she said. I learned that I could manage a household at 12 years old when my mother got sick. I learned butchering because the man my father hired stopped showing up. I learn things when they need to be learned. She met his eyes steadily. I'm not telling you I already know everything. I'm telling you I won't quit when I don't. Cade held her gaze. Pay's modest. Pays something, she said. That's already more than I had yesterday. Another pause. He nodded once. All right then. He stood and carried his cup to the washstand. There's fence line needs walking in the north pasture. I'll be out until midday. Kitchen's yours. If you want to understand how the storeroom's organized, Tommy can show you before he starts on the corrals. He picked up his gloves from the table. He paused at the door. Miss Pruitt, he said without turning around. Yes. If Briggs comes back while I'm out, you don't go to the door. You find Tommy. He left. Eliza sat at the kitchen table for a moment longer, her hands around the now empty coffee cup, the sound of his boots crossing the porch, and then the yard fading into the ordinary morning sounds of a working ranch. She thought about the last 2 days. She thought about her father's kitchen table. She thought about the word arrangement and the word finished, and the small window above the cot in the back room of a house she had walked out of. Then she stood up, pushed her sleeves back, and went to find Tommy. Learning a ranch from the inside was nothing like anything she had expected. She had expected it to be hard. She hadn't quite expected it to be relentless in the specific way. It was not cruel, not punishing, just utterly uninterested in her comfort or her readiness. The animals needed what they needed when they needed it. The storeroom needed organizing whether or not her back ached from the previous day. The bread needed baking whether or not she had slept. Tommy was a surprisingly patient teacher for someone his age. He showed her the storeroom with the care of someone who had learned by making mistakes and didn't want her to make the same ones. He showed her how the well rope had a trick to it on the left side where the handle was worn. He showed her which of the chickens would peck without warning and which one could be handled if you came at it from the right angle. Mr. Whitmore doesn't say much, he said on the second afternoon while they were both occupied with sorting harness leather in the barn. In case you're wondering if you've done something wrong. Eliza looked up from the tangle of leather she was working through. I wasn't wondering that. Most people wonder that, Tommy said. When they first get here, he goes quiet, and they think they said something bad, or he's unhappy. He's just quiet. It's how he is. I've noticed, she said. I don't mind quiet. Tommy glanced at her. You're not what I expected, he said with the bluntness of someone too young to have learned to filter it yet. What did you expect? Somebody more. He searched for the word. Fragile. When Mr. Whitmore said a woman from the Briggs arrangement was staying, I thought... He stopped himself. Sorry, that wasn't respectful. It's all right, Eliza said. I would probably have thought the same thing. She pulled a buckle free from the tangled leather and set it aside. What made you change your mind? Tommy considered this with the seriousness of a 19-year-old who was trying to answer honestly. You fixed the chicken coop latch this morning without asking anyone how, he said. It was just broken, and you fixed it. Eliza looked at him. Then she went back to the harness leather, and something in her chest that had been tight for longer than she could accurately remember loosened by a fraction. The first time she and Cade genuinely talked, not the practical exchange of information about ranch work, not the morning logistics of who was going where and what needed doing, but actually talked, happened on the fourth night when a summer storm came in from the north and knocked the power line to the barn sideways and sent Tommy to fix it in the rain while Cade and Eliza sat on the covered porch because there was nothing either of them could usefully do until Tommy reported back. The rain was heavy and warm, the way summer rain in Montana can be, hammering the roof of the porch, making the world beyond the rail invisible. Cade had coffee. Eliza had taken his lead and made herself a cup as well, and they sat in chairs that faced the rain and were quiet for a while, with the particular comfort of people who have established that their silences are not a problem. Then Cade said, Where are you from originally before Cheyenne? Nebraska, she said. A town called Grover, small, flat, very far from everything. You miss it. She thought about Grover honestly, the way she'd been letting herself think honestly about most things since leaving the Briggs house. No, she said. I missed what I thought it was when I was young. By the time I left, I understood it differently. What changed? I got older. She held the coffee cup in both hands and listened to the rain. When you're a child in a small town, you think the smallness is the town's fault. Then you grow up and you realize the smallness is in the people who decided what you were allowed to want. A pause. The rain shifted direction, slightly gusting, and a thin spray reached the edge of the porch where their feet were. Your father, Cade said. Not exactly a question. He's not a cruel man, Eliza said. That's the complicated part. He never hit me. He never said anything outright unkind. He looked at me and saw something to be managed. Something to be placed somewhere appropriate and handled properly. And after enough years of someone looking at you that way, you start to wonder if they're right. The silence after that felt careful. Cade turned his coffee cup in his hands, the same way he'd turned it that first morning at the kitchen table. My wife looked at me that way, he said. Eliza turned her head toward him. She hadn't known there'd been a wife. She waited. Not that she meant harm, he said. She was a decent woman. But she married what she thought I was going to become, and when I didn't become it, she stopped seeing me and started seeing the disappointment instead. He paused. She went back east 4 years ago. We never had children. She's remarried now to a man who works in a bank in St. Louis. I'm sorry, Eliza said. Don't be, he said. It was the right thing, for both of us. He looked out at the rain. But it does something to a person. Having someone look through you instead of at you, for long enough. Yes, Eliza said quietly. It does. The rain eased for a moment, then came back harder. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses made a sound. Tommy's lantern moved in the darkness, visible through the rain as a small warm point of light, which meant he was all right. You don't have to stay, Cade said. I want to say that clearly. If an opportunity comes that gives you more than this ranch, can a better position somewhere, money to travel, whatever it is you actually want, you don't owe this place anything. Eliza looked at him. The lantern light from inside the house caught the line of his profile, the straight jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth. She had a sudden clear thought that this was what it looked like when someone was actually being kind, not performing it, not using it to accumulate something, just doing it because it was the right thing to say. I know, she said. Thank you for saying it. They sat in the rain sound and said nothing more for a while. It was, Eliza thought, the most honest conversation she'd had in years. 3 days later, Sheriff Roy Pruitt rode up the lane to Whitmore Ridge. He was a large man with a patient manner that Eliza recognized immediately as the kind of patience that comes from confidence rather than kindness. The patience of someone who believes they will eventually get what they came for. He tipped his hat to Eliza, who was at the porch rail when he arrived with the courtliness of a man who would be polite right up until he wasn't. Miss Pruitt, he said. I wonder if we might have a word. You may, she said. Would you like to come in, or shall we speak here? Here is fine. He dismounted and looped his reins over the rail post without asking permission. I expect you know why I'm here. I expect Mr. Briggs filed a complaint, she said. He did. Pruitt drew a folded paper from his vest pocket. He's claiming breach of contract. Says the arrangement between yourself and him was legally binding, and your departure constitutes violation of an agreement made in good faith. Eliza looked at the paper without taking it. Did he show you the contract? He did. Does my name appear on it? Pruitt paused, almost imperceptibly. Your father's name appears on it. My name, she said again. Mine. Does it appear? Another pause. No. Then it seems to me, Eliza said, keeping her voice entirely calm, that you have a document signed by a man committing his daughter to something she was never asked to consent to. Which is not a contract between Mr. Briggs and myself. It's an arrangement between Mr. Briggs and my father, 2 parties I was not one of. Pruitt looked at her. He was reassessing something. She could see him doing it. Whatever he'd expected when he rode up here, this was not it. There are witnesses, he said. People in Mill Haven who saw you arrive with Briggs and take up residence at his property. I arrived in Millhaven, and Mr. Briggs drove me to his property, she said. I did not sign anything. I did not make any verbal agreement before witnesses. I stayed at his property for 2 days performing household labor, which any reasonable person would argue constitutes employment, rather than consent to marriage. She kept her eyes level on his. I would be very interested to hear which judge in this territory would rule that a woman arriving to perform domestic work is automatically consenting to marriage simply because a man paid for her transportation. The silence that followed had a slightly different quality than the ones that had come before. Cade had come out of the barn. He was standing a distance back, not intruding, not interfering. Just present, his hat in his hand. Pruitt looked at the paper. He folded it again slowly. "Miss Pruitt," he said, "I'm going to be frank with you. Harlan Briggs has influence in this county. He has friends on the land board and 2 men who serve as deputy commissioners. If he decides to pursue this through official channels, it's going to be an uphill road for you, regardless of the legal merits." "I appreciate the honesty," she said. "I'm not saying it's right," he said. "I'm saying it's how things sit." "Then I suppose," she said, "that I had better make sure my position is very clearly established before he has the chance to move through official channels. Thank you for coming, Sheriff. Can I offer you water before you ride back?" Pruitt looked at her for a moment longer. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth moved in something that might have been reluctant respect. "I'm fine, thank you," he said. He put the paper back in his pocket. He remounted. "Miss Pruitt, for what it's worth, you argue better than most lawyers I've seen in this territory." He rode away. Eliza held the porch rail until the sound of his horse had faded. Then her hands let go, and she turned around, and Cade was right there closer than she'd realized. "You knew he was coming," she said. "Briggs mentioned it in town yesterday," Cade said. "I heard about it this morning. You didn't tell me." "No." She looked at him. "Why not?" He met her eyes. "Because I wanted to see how you'd handle it without someone coaching you first." A pause. "You didn't need coaching." She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her, not quite anger, not quite gratitude, something more complicated than either. "Next time," she said, "tell me." "Fair enough," he said. What she hadn't expected was how much of the ranch work she would come to care about. She had expected to manage it, to do it competently and without complaint, and be grateful for the competency. She hadn't expected the early mornings to become the part of the day she looked forward to, most the hour before anyone else was fully awake, when she made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the light come over the mountains and felt something she didn't immediately have a word for. She found the word eventually. It was ownership, not of the land, of her own time, of her own mornings, of the particular quiet of a space where no one was waiting to be disappointed in her. The chickens became hers in a way she hadn't anticipated. She learned their individual temperaments, which ones would come to her hand, which one had a tendency to escape the yard, and she found herself talking to them in the morning while she fed them. Not because she thought they understood, but because there was something satisfying about filling silence with her own voice without it requiring anything in return. Tommy watched this development with the serious interest of a young man who was genuinely trying to understand people. "You talk to the chickens," he observed one morning. "I do," she agreed. "Mr. Whitmore used to talk to the horses," he said. "Before." She looked at him. "Before what?" Tommy seemed to realize he'd said something he hadn't fully planned to say. He shifted his weight. "Before Mrs. Whitmore left. He used to spend a lot of time in the barn. After she went, he stopped doing it as much." Eliza looked out toward the barn. "He doesn't now." "Sometimes," Tommy said. "Not the same way." She thought about this later, working through the kitchen garden, a small neglected plot at the side of the house that had been let go since Mrs. Arden's departure, pulling weeds in the afternoon heat, with her sleeves rolled up and the sun warm on her arms. She thought about Cade in the barn with his horses before things went wrong, and Cade in the barn now, and the difference between those two things that Tommy had noticed and couldn't quite name. She thought about what it meant when someone stopped doing the thing that was theirs. She was still thinking about it when she heard him behind her. "You found the garden," Cade said. She looked up. He was leaning against the side of the house with his arms crossed, looking at the plot with an expression she couldn't immediately read. "It needs work," she said. "But the soil's good. If I put seeds in now, there might still be time for something before first frost." "Mrs. Arden grew tomatoes," he said, "and beans. What would you want?" He looked at her. The question seemed to have landed in an unexpected place. "What do you mean?" "In the garden," she said. "What would you actually want to grow here if you could have anything?" A pause. He looked at the garden plot. "Lavender," he said. Then he stopped like he was slightly surprised to hear himself say it. "My mother grew lavender. It doesn't make sense on a working ranch. It's not useful." "Lavender has uses," Eliza said. "Medicinal, for moths in stored blankets. And it's not nothing to have something that's there because it's beautiful, rather than because it's useful." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the garden. "I'll see if Milner's store has seed," he said, and he walked back toward the barn. Eliza turned back to the weeds. She was smiling before she fully realized she was. The letter from her father arrived 10 days after she'd come to Whitmore Ridge. It came through the Millhaven postal clerk, which meant someone in town had told her father where she was, which meant either Briggs had found a way to contact him, or the information had simply traveled the way information travels in small places through the invisible channels of everyone knowing everyone else's business. She read it alone in her room. It was not a long letter. Her father was not a man who used more words than he felt were necessary. He told her she had disgraced herself and the family name. He told her that Briggs was owed compensation for the expense of arranging her transportation and her keep for those 2 days. He told her that if she had any sense of decency, she would return and honor the commitment he had made on her behalf. He did not ask if she was safe. He did not ask what had made her leave. He did not use her name in the letter at all, which she found when she noticed it to be the part that hurt most. Precisely because it was the most honest thing he had ever done. More honest than anything he'd ever said directly, because it told her clearly what she had always partly suspected. She was not a person to him. She was an obligation that had failed to resolve itself properly. She sat with that for a while. Then she folded the letter, walked to the kitchen stove, opened the iron door, and set the letter on the coals and watched it go. Cade was at the table. He had seen her come in with the letter. He had seen her face when she put it in the stove. He didn't ask. She sat back down at the table. She poured herself coffee from the pot between them. She held the cup in both hands. "I wants me to go back," she said, because she found she wanted to say it out loud, not because she needed to be talked out of anything, but because she was done keeping things in her own chest to manage alone. "Are you going to?" Cade asked. "No." "All right," he said. That was all. No analysis, no advice, no careful management of her feelings. Just, all right. She thought that if someone had told her 6 months ago that she would find those 2 words from a man she'd known for 10 days to be among the most solid things she'd ever heard, she would not have believed them. She believed them now. Outside, the summer pressed its full weight against the Montana afternoon, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk called once and was answered by nothing, and Eliza Pruitt drank her coffee at a table that was not hers yet, and felt something she was still too careful to call by its right name settle in her chest like the first stone laid in a foundation. The lavender seeds arrived from Milner's store on a Tuesday, tucked into a small paper envelope that Cade set on the kitchen table without ceremony. The way he set most things down without announcement, without expectation of a particular response. Just placed it there and poured his coffee and sat down like it was nothing. Eliza picked up the envelope. She turned it over in her hands. "Thank you," she said. "Milner said they might not take," Cade said. "Wrong season." "They might," she said. He looked at his coffee. "They might," he agreed. It was a small thing. She knew it was a small thing. But she had lived long enough inside a life where small things were never done without a price attached to them, where every act of consideration came wrapped in the expectation of gratitude, performed loudly enough to satisfy that she had learned to recognize the weight of kindness that asked for nothing back. It felt different in the chest, lighter and heavier at the same time. She planted the lavender that afternoon, whether or not it took. What broke open first was not what she expected. She had been preparing for Briggs. She had been preparing for another visit from Sheriff Pruitt, another legal threat, another letter from her father, another version of the pressure that had been building since the morning she walked through the pines with her bag. She had organized herself internally around the shape of that fight, mapping her position and her arguments and her resources the way you map terrain before you move through it. She was not prepared for the women of Millhaven. It started with Martha Colton, the wife of the man who ran the feed and grain, who arrived at Whitmore Ridge on a Wednesday morning in a buckboard with her sister-in-law and a covered dish, and an expression that managed to be both friendly and probing in equal measure. Eliza was at the well when they came up the lane. She straightened and waited and told herself to be civil. "Miss Pruitt," Martha said, climbing down with the dish in her arms. "I hope you don't mind us stopping by. We wanted to welcome you properly. Millhaven's not a big town, but we do try to be neighborly." "That's kind of you," Eliza said. "We brought a corn pudding," the sister-in-law introduced as Agnes said, "for the house." They came inside. Eliza made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, Martha and Agnes, with their corn pudding and their friendliness, and for the first 20 minutes, the conversation was entirely unremarkable. How did she find Montana? Wasn't the summer heat? Something did she know Mrs. Arden who'd been here before? Then Martha set down her cup and said with the precision of someone who had been patient long enough, "We were surprised, of course, when we heard about the arrangement with Harlan Briggs falling through." "I expect you were," Eliza said. "It put him in a difficult position," Agnes said. "He'd already paid the transport fees." "He had," Eliza agreed. "Some people in town feel—" Martha paused, selecting her words. "Some people feel it was not entirely fair to Mr. Briggs. He was acting in good faith." Eliza looked at her steadily. "Did either of you meet Mr. Briggs before you married your husbands?" The question landed in an unexpected place. Martha blinked. "Well, no," she said. "In those days arrangements were—" "Were what?" Eliza said. Her voice was pleasant. She kept it pleasant deliberately. "Were made by other people on your behalf, and did you have the option of refusing if you'd wanted to?" A silence. "That's different," Agnes said, but she said it without full conviction. "Is it?" Eliza said. "I'm genuinely asking. Because it seems to me that the difference between a good arrangement and a bad one isn't whether a woman consented. It's whether anyone thought to ask." She picked up her own cup. "I don't hold any ill will toward Mr. Briggs as a person. I hold the position that I should have been asked before my life was committed to his. That seems like a reasonable position to hold." Martha looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the table. Then she looked at her corn pudding. "I suppose it does," she said quietly. Agnes said nothing. But the set of her expression had shifted from prepared argument to something more uncertain. They stayed another half hour. When they left, Martha pressed Eliza's hand at the door and said, "You're braver than most, Miss Pruitt," in a way that sounded like it had cost her something to say. Eliza stood on the porch and watched them drive away, and felt the complicated truth of what had just happened, that there were women in Millhaven who might become something like allies if she moved carefully, and that moving carefully was a different skill than the one she'd been practicing. She was still thinking about it when Cade came in from the north pasture. He took one look at her face and said, "Who came?" "Martha Colton and her sister-in-law," she said. "What did they want?" "To assess me," she said, "and possibly to suggest I reconsider." He sat down and pulled off one boot with the unhurried efficiency of a man at the end of a long working day. "Did they?" "They tried," Eliza said. "I don't think it went the way they planned." He looked at her with the particular expression she had started to recognize, the one that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. "No," he said. "I don't suppose it did." The real trouble arrived on a Friday, and it arrived in a form she hadn't predicted. She was in Millhaven. She had gone in with Tommy to pick up supplies from Milner's store the first time she'd been back in town since the morning Briggs had driven her out to his property, and she had walked through it with her head up and her pace steady because she had decided that was the only way to walk through a place where people were watching you. Most people looked. A few nodded. A few looked away. That was the full range. She was at the counter in Milner's with Tommy loading sacks of flour onto the buckboard outside when the door opened and a woman came in that Eliza had not seen before. Tall, well-dressed in a way that registered even by the standards of 1879 Montana, not flashy but precise, with the kind of careful put-togetherness that announces money without shouting it. Dark-haired, perhaps 40, with a composed face that had learned a long time ago not to show what it was thinking. She looked at Eliza, and she did not look away. "You're the Pruitt woman," she said. Not a question. Her voice was low and controlled, the kind of voice that gave nothing free. "I am," Eliza said. "I'm Catherine Briggs," she said. "Harlan's sister. I came from Helena when I heard what happened." Eliza held very still. She looked at Catherine Briggs across the counter of Milner's general store and recalibrated everything she'd prepared for. "I see," Eliza said. "I'd like to speak with you privately," Catherine said, "if you're willing." "I'm willing," Eliza said. They stepped outside. Tommy gave Eliza a look she read clearly as "Do you need me to stay?" and she gave him a small shake of her head that she hoped communicated, "I'm all right, but don't go far." They stood at the side of the building, out of the main foot traffic of the road. "My brother is angry," Catherine said without preamble. "He's been humiliated in his view, and men like Harlan respond to humiliation with a specific kind of stubbornness that doesn't improve with time." "I'm aware," Eliza said. "He's been speaking to people on the Land Commission," Catherine said. "The Whitmore property has water rights that cross Briggs' land at the lower creek. There's a question that's been unresolved for some years about which side of that boundary the primary draw belongs to." Eliza went very still. "He's going to use the water rights dispute," she said. "He's already started," Catherine said. "He filed a preliminary claim office 2 days ago." The ground shifted under everything. Eliza understood immediately and completely what this meant, not just for her, but for Cade, for the ranch, for Tommy, for everything that had been quietly built on Whitmore Ridge while she'd been planting lavender and learning the chicken personalities and sitting on a rainy porch talking about being seen. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which she was grateful for. Catherine looked at her for a moment. "Because my brother is not a good man," she said. "He's not a violent man. He's not a cruel man in the way that's visible. But he believes very sincerely that the world owes him a particular order of things, and when that order is disrupted, he will dismantle whatever's nearby until it's restored." She paused. "I've watched him do it before. To other people. I didn't intervene then. I'm intervening now." "Why now?" "Because you're the first person who said no to him out loud," Catherine said. "In my experience, the first time someone does that, it matters whether they survive it." The bluntness of it was like cold water. Eliza absorbed it. "What do you suggest?" she said. "Get ahead of the land claim," Catherine said. "Whatever documentation Cade Whitmore has on those water rights deed surveys, correspondence, anything he needs it organized and in front of a legal representative before Harlan's claim moves through the county office. The land commissioner in Helena is more impartial than the one here. If the case can be moved to that level, it changes the outcome." She looked at Eliza directly. "And Miss Pruitt, I'd suggest you remove yourself from the center of this publicly. Not because you're wrong. Because right now, your presence at Whitmore Ridge is the story my brother is telling. The moment you're not the story, the water rights become a straightforward legal matter instead of a personal one. And legal matters are winnable." Eliza looked at this woman, Harlan Briggs's sister, who had come from Helena to tell her something her own brother would have preferred she didn't know, and she thought about what it cost a person to do what she was doing. "Thank you," Eliza said. "Don't thank me," Catherine said. "Just do something with it." She pulled on her glove with the calm efficiency of someone who had said what she came to say and was finished. "He's not going to let this go, Miss Pruitt, but that doesn't mean he gets to win." She walked away down the road without looking back. Eliza told Cade that evening. All of it. Not the carefully managed version, not the one softened to be easier to hear. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, and she told him exactly what Catherine Briggs had said, word for word, as close as her memory could hold it. Cade listened without interrupting. His face was still in the way it got when he was thinking seriously, not the closed stillness of someone shutting down, but the concentrated stillness of someone actually processing. When she finished, he said, "The water claim." "Yes." "He's been looking for a reason to file that for 3 years, Cade said. "There was a survey dispute back in '76 that nobody resolved because both sides were willing to leave it alone." He looked at his hands on the table. "He was willing to leave it alone because he knew I'd fight it, and it would cost him too." "And now he's angrier than it's going to cost him," Eliza said. "Yes. Do you have the documentation, the original deed, the survey from when the property was established?" "I have it," he said. "My father kept everything. I know where it is." She met his eyes. "We need to look at it tonight." He held her gaze. "We," he said. It wasn't a correction. It was something else. A question that wasn't quite a question. "If you'll let me help," she said. He pushed back from the table. "I'll get the documents," he said. They spread the papers across the kitchen table. Deeds, surveys, correspondence between Cade's father and the original county assessor, going back to 1861, a letter from a territorial surveyor in 1869 referencing the creek boundary. Another document she didn't immediately recognize until she read the header and realized it was a water rights registration filed with the territorial government in 1871 and witnessed by 3 men whose names she didn't know. Eliza went through it methodically. She had spent enough years managing her father's household accounts because no one else would, that she knew how to read documents, how to find the weight-bearing elements, how to identify what was solid and what was assumption. "This one," she said. She put her finger on the 1871 registration. "This is the strongest piece. It predates whatever Briggs filed, and it's registered at the territorial level, not just the county. If he filed with the county land office, this supersedes his claim." Cade leaned over the table. He read what she was pointing to. She watched his face. "I forgot this existed," he said. "It exists," she said. He straightened up. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something that hadn't yet decided how to close back up. "You found that in 20 minutes, he said. "I looked for what mattered," she said. I was quiet for a moment. "My father filed this," he said. "I was 12 years old when he did this. He spent 3 days at the territorial office making sure it was done right. He told me once that the land wasn't worth fighting over if you hadn't been willing to do the paperwork first." He looked at the document. "I hadn't looked at it in years." "Then it's a good thing it came up," she said. He looked at her. Eliza. It was the first time he'd used her first name. They both noticed it. She held very still. "I need you to understand something," he said. "Whatever Briggs does with the water claim, with the legal pressure, with whatever he decides to aim at this ranch next, none of that is your fault. You didn't cause this by coming here." She held his gaze. "I know that," she said. "I came to you because I was already running from something that wasn't my fault either. I'm not in the habit of carrying guilt for other people's decisions." "Good," he said. She picked up the 1871 document. "We need to write to the land office in Helena," she said. "Tonight if we can. Get this in front of someone at the territorial level before Briggs's county claim has time to become anything official." He sat back down. He pulled a piece of paper toward him. "Tell me what to say," he said. She sat down across from him. She told him what to say. The letter went out the next morning. Tommy took it to Millhaven's postal office before the morning was 2 hours old, writing fast enough that Eliza only hoped he didn't attract the kind of attention that would slow him down. She went about the day's work. She fed the chickens. She checked the lavender seeds, which were showing the first faint thread of green at the soil level that might have been growth and might have been wishful thinking. She made bread and mended a section of harness leather that had been wearing thin, and she did all of it with the ordinary competence of someone who understood that the daily work of a thing is what holds it together while the large decisions are in motion elsewhere. But something else was in motion too, and she knew it. What she didn't know was that it would arrive that same afternoon. She was in the kitchen garden, the late afternoon sun on her back, her hands in the dirt, the way they'd gotten comfortable being when she heard the horse. Single rider, coming fast. She straightened up and turned. It was not Briggs. It was not the sheriff. It was a young man she didn't recognize, maybe 16, riding a horse that had been pushed harder than it liked, and he pulled up at the yard gate with the expression of someone carrying information they weren't sure how to deliver. "Is Mr. Whitmore here?" he called. "He's in the barn," Eliza said. "What's happened?" The boy hesitated. He looked at her, assessed in the way young people assess adults they don't know, trying to determine whether they can be trusted with the weight of a thing. "There was a meeting," he said. "At the land office in Millhaven. Mr. Briggs came in this morning with 2 men from the county commission, and they filed the full water claim. Not just preliminary, full." He swallowed. "And there was something else. My father works at the land office. He said Mr. Briggs brought a document. He said it's a deed transfer. Says the water draw on the lower creek was sold by your father." He looked at Eliza, realized she wasn't. Whitmore looked back toward the barn. "Mr. Whitmore's father says it was sold in 1870. The air changed." "In 1870, Eliza said. "Yes, ma'am." "1 year before the water rights registration," she said, almost to herself. The boy didn't know what that meant, but she did. She went to the barn. She said Cade. He came out of the stall he'd been working in. He read her face. "What?" "Briggs filed the full claim today," she said. "And he brought a deed transfer. Says your father sold the water rights to the Lower Creek Draw in 1870. She watched his face. He went very still. "That's a lie," he said. "I know. My father never sold those rights. Those rights were the reason we kept the ranch when everything else was going sideways in '68. He would not have sold them." "I know," she said again. "But someone produced a document saying he did, and it's dated a year before the registration we found last night. If the registration was filed after a prior transfer, it becomes complicated." Cade's jaw tightened. "It's forged. Then we need to prove that," she said. "And we need to prove it before that deed transfer becomes the official record." He looked at her for one long moment. She held his gaze and did not flinch from the weight of it, from what she could see in his face, which was not panic, but was something close to the feeling of watching something you've built start to crack along a line you didn't know was there. "My father knew the territorial surveyor," Cade said. "Man named August Webb. He was the one who witnessed the 1871 registration. He's retired now, lives up in Butte. But if the transfer document in 1870 was real, Webb would have known about it. He handled every land transaction in this valley for 15 years. "Can we reach him?" Eliza said. "I can send a telegram." "Then we send it today," she said. "Right now, before anything else." He looked at her, and for a moment the full weight of what she was doing hit her, because she could see it hit him too, that she was standing in his barn 2 weeks after arriving with one bag and no plan, telling him how to fight for something that was his, and doing it not because she owed it to him, or because she was afraid, or because there was a transaction at the bottom of it, but because it was simply the right thing to do, and she had the capacity to help. "You don't have to do this," he said. "This isn't your fight." "2 weeks ago I walked through a set of pine trees," she said, "and asked you to let me stay. You gave me coffee and a room with a lock on the door, and you didn't ask for an explanation. You don't get to tell me this isn't my fight." Something in him shifted, settled. "All right," he said. They went to send the telegram. August Webb's reply came back within 48 hours, which meant Webb had been near a telegraph office when the message arrived or had moved fast to get to one. The message was short. "No transfer of water rights occurred in 1870. I handled every transaction in that valley. Your father's record is clean. Document is fraudulent. Will testify. A. Webb." Eliza read it 3 times. Then she handed it to Cade. He read it. He set it on the table. He put both hands flat on the table beside it and stood there for a moment with his head slightly bowed. "He'll testify," Eliza said quietly. "Yes," Cade said. "Then we have the registration. We have Webb's testimony. And we have a documented timeline that shows the deed transfer is dated a year before a water rights registration that should not have been possible if the transfer had actually occurred. She looked at him. That's fraud, Cade. Official fraud. Filed with the County Land Commission. He lifted his head. His eyes were steady now. Whatever the initial impact had been, it had moved through, and what was left was the particular clarity of a person who has identified what they're fighting and decided they're going to fight it. I need a lawyer, he said. You need the best one you can reach, she said. Not in Millhaven. There's a man in Bozeman, he said. Horace Delaney. He handled water rights disputes in 74 and 76. He knows this territory's law better than anyone. Write to him, she said. Today. He was already moving toward the paper. The town found out within 2 days. Of course it did, because towns that size have no mechanism for keeping things separate from themselves, and what had been a private legal matter became in the way such things become the subject of every conversation at Milner's counter, and the saloon, and the spot outside the church where the women gathered after Sunday service. The interpretations split along lines that surprised her. She had expected the town to side with Briggs. He was established, connected, known. She was a stranger who had disrupted an arrangement that many in the town had seen as reasonable. But the word-forged document traveled fast, and it carried a specific kind of weight that breach of contract did not. People who had been neutral became cautious. People who had been quietly sympathetic became openly so. Martha Colton stopped her at the edge of the road on Thursday morning and said low and quick, "Whatever you need, supplies, signatures on something, character, witness, you come to me," and walked away before Eliza could fully respond. The thing was moving now. She could feel it moving the way you feel a current under a river's surface, invisible but real, pulling toward somewhere. What she had not accounted for was Briggs himself. She should have. She knew it afterward, had known even in the middle of it, that she should have been more prepared for the moment when a man who was losing decided that the legal route was too slow. She was walking back from the chicken yard. Early morning, the sun barely up when she saw him. He was on horseback at the edge of the yard, just standing there, not advancing, just present, with a stillness that was the specific stillness of a man who wants to be seen standing there. She stopped. They looked at each other across 20 yards of morning air. "I'm not going to pretend this isn't personal," Briggs said. His voice was even. The anger in it was the controlled kind, which was more dangerous than the loud kind. "I was going to be decent about this. I was prepared to be decent." "You were prepared to own me," Eliza said. "That's a different thing." Something moved through his face. "You have made my business everyone's business in this county," he said. "You have cost me in ways you don't have the standing to understand." "Then I imagine that's frustrating," she said. "I want you gone from this county," he said. "I want you off Whitmore property and out of Millhaven before the end of this month. If you go quietly, I withdraw the water claim. The fraud allegation goes away. Everything goes back to the way it was." The morning air was very still. She thought about what he was offering. She understood the shape of it completely, the transactional clarity of it, the familiar logic of a world that solved problems by moving women from one place to another until they stopped being inconvenient. She thought about the 1871 water registration on the kitchen table. She thought about August Webb's telegram. She thought about Martha Colton pressing her hand. She thought about lavender seeds in the ground. She thought about Cade's voice saying Eliza for the first time. "No," she said. Briggs looked at her. His jaw tightened. "I wasn't offering you a kindness," he said. "I was offering you a way out." "I know," she said. "I don't want your way out. I want the truth on record, and I want this ranch protected, and I want to stay exactly where I am. Those aren't negotiable." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned his horse slowly, deliberately, and rode back toward the road. She stood in the yard and breathed. Her hands were not shaking this time. That was the difference. She noticed it clearly, the way you notice the absence of something you've carried so long you forgot it was there. 3 weeks ago her hands had shaken. This morning they were steady, and she was standing in the yard of a ranch that was not hers, and facing down a man who had once made her feel like a transaction, and her hands were completely steady. The front door of this house opened. Cade stepped out onto the porch. He had seen. He looked at her with a question he didn't voice. She walked back toward the house. He offered to drop the water claim if I leave, she said. Cade's face went very still. What did you tell him? She met his eyes. I told him no, she said. Obviously. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that had something in it she couldn't entirely name, something that went past gratitude and past relief and into a territory she wasn't sure either of them had fully mapped yet. Eliza, he said. Don't say thank you, she said. I didn't do it as a favor. I know, he said. That's not what I was going to say. She waited. He held her gaze. I was going to say, I don't know what I would have done if you'd said yes. The morning light held them both for a moment, still and honest and entirely without pretense, and Eliza thought, this is what it feels like when the ground is actually solid under you. Not the borrowed solidity of someone else's mercy. Not the fragile ground of someone else's arrangement. The real kind. The kind you build yourself by staying when it would have been easier to go. She didn't say any of that. She said, we should write to Delaney again. I want to make sure he knows about this morning. Cade nodded. He held the door open. She walked inside. Horace Delaney arrived from Bozeman on a Thursday, 9 days after Cade's letter reached him, and he was nothing like what Eliza had imagined. She had pictured someone formal. Someone with the polished surface of a man who spent his days in rooms where language was a weapon and appearance was armor. Delaney was short, broad through the shoulders, with a beard that needed attention and eyes that moved over a room, the way a chess player moves over a board, cataloging, calculating, never still. He shook Cade's hand. He looked at Eliza. You're the woman in the middle of this, he said. I'm the woman who found the documentation, she said. He looked at her for one more second. Then he said, Good, sit down, both of you. I've got a lot of questions, and I'd rather ask them once. They sat. Tommy made coffee without being asked, set it on the table, and disappeared with the tact of someone who had learned when his presence was useful and when it wasn't. Delaney pulled a leather case onto the table, opened it, and produced a notepad, already dense with writing. He looked at the documents Eliza and Cade had spread across the table, the 1871 registration, the web telegram, the copy of Briggs's filed claim that Sheriff Pruitt had been legally obligated to provide when Cade's written request had made ignoring it impossible. He read for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he said, The forged deed is sloppy. Cade looked at him. Sloppy how? The witness signatures, Delaney said. 2 of the 3 men listed as witnesses to this 1870 transfer. I need you to tell me if you recognize these names. He turned the copy of Briggs's deed toward Cade and pointed. Cade looked. Something shifted in his face. James Carver died in 1868, he said. He was my father's nearest neighbor. He died of fever 2 years before this document says he witnessed a transaction. Delaney sat back. There it is. Eliza leaned forward and looked at the name. James Carver. Witnessed and signed. 1870. 2 years after the man was dead. He used a dead man as a witness, she said. I used someone who couldn't contradict him, Delaney said. It's not the first time I've seen it. It won't be the last. But it is fraud. It is documentable fraud, and it is the kind that a territorial judge will not look at charitably. He picked up his coffee. We file a fraud complaint with the territorial court in Helena. We submit Webb's testimony, the death record for Carver. Can you get the death record? The church in Mill Haven keeps records, Cade said. Pastor Holloway has been there since '65. He'll have it. Get it, Delaney said. Today if you can. He looked at the Webb telegram again. Webb's willing to come down and testify in person. He said he would, Eliza said. Good. I want him in front of a judge, not just on paper. A man who's been the territorial surveyor for 15 years saying he never processed this transfer carries more weight than a telegram. He closed his notepad. This is winnable. I want to be clear about that. But Briggs is going to move fast once he understands we've found the Carver problem. He's going to try to get the county commission to ratify the claim before we can get it elevated to the territorial level. We have maybe a week. Cade said, What do you need from me? Your full cooperation and your father's complete records, Delaney said. And someone who can organize all of this into a clear chronological presentation so that when I stand in front of a judge, I'm not shuffling through papers looking for what I need. He looked at Eliza when he said it. She met his eyes. I can do that, she said. I know, he said. That's why I'm looking at you. The next 4 days were the hardest and most clarifying of Eliza's life. She slept in short intervals. She organized documents across the kitchen table in a chronological spread that she mapped from 1861 to the present. Every deed, every survey, every letter, every territorial filing, and she cross-referenced each against the other with the focused intensity of someone who understood that the difference between winning and losing was whether the story the papers told was coherent enough to withstand someone else trying to rewrite it. Tommy brought her coffee at intervals she didn't track. Cade sat across from her and worked through his own pieces, writing statements, confirming dates from memory, pulling old correspondence from the chest his father had left, and they worked in the particular quiet of people engaged in something real together. The kind of work that strips the performance out of a situation and leaves only what a person actually is. On the second night, somewhere past midnight, Cade said, "You should sleep." "So should you," she said without looking up. "I don't sleep much," he said. "Neither do I lately," she said. She turned a document over to read the back. "When this is finished, I intend to sleep for approximately 3 consecutive days." "I'll tell Tommy not to disturb you," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression that had been appearing more frequently, not the closed stillness of early days, but something more open, something that didn't seem to know yet what to do with itself. "Cade," she said. "Yes." "When this is over," she stopped, started again. "Whatever happens with the legal case, whatever happens after, I want to stay." The kitchen was very quiet. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I'm telling you what I want. I'm telling you because I spent a long time not saying what I wanted out loud, and I've decided I'm not doing that anymore." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want you to stay." She held his gaze. "All right then," she said. "All right," he said. They went back to the documents. But something had changed in the air of the room. Something had been said and received without deflection or management, or the careful distance of people who haven't decided to trust each other yet. It sat between them differently than it had before. She worked better after that. She couldn't have explained why, except that there is something about a decision made openly that frees up energy you didn't know you'd been spending on holding it back. Turn. Pastor Holloway produced James Carver's death record on Friday morning without hesitation, and with a righteous efficiency that suggested he had already heard what Briggs had filed and had opinions about it. "September 14th, 1868, he said, pressing the record copy into Eliza's hands. "I buried James Carver myself. God rest him. He was a decent man, and I will not have his name put on a fraudulent document without saying so plainly." "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" Eliza asked. "I'll say it to a judge's face if they want me to," Holloway said. "Where do I sign?" She had not expected the pastor. She added him to the list. She was also not expecting Martha Colton, who appeared at Whitmore Ridge on Friday afternoon with her husband, a large quiet man named George, who it turned out had served as a county land surveyor himself in the early 1870s and had overlapping knowledge of the valley's boundary history that he had been holding quietly until someone gave him a reason to put it forward. "I should have come sooner," Martha said. "I knew what Harlan Briggs was like. I've known for years. I told myself it wasn't my business." She looked at Eliza with the directness of someone who had made a decision and was following it all the way. "That was wrong. I'm correcting it." George Colton sat down with Cade and spent 2 hours going through documents with the methodical care of a man who trusted specifics over impressions. And what he produced was a handwritten statement that corroborated the Whitmore water registration from a position of professional authority that Delaney, when he read it, called the best piece of collateral evidence he'd seen in a land case in a decade. The case was building. Eliza could feel it building the way you feel. A structure becomes solid, not in one dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of each piece finding its place. What she hadn't prepared for was her father. Franklin Pruitt arrived in Millhaven on Saturday morning. No warning, no second letter. He simply appeared the way problems do when you've almost finished solving the first one. Tommy saw him first at the edge of town when he'd gone in for supplies and rode back to the ranch fast enough that Eliza knew from the sound of his horse before she saw his face that something had changed. "Your father," Tommy said, barely dismounted. "He's in Millhaven, at the hotel. He came with a man I don't recognize, not Briggs, someone else. Suit briefcase." Eliza set down what she was holding. She thought about the letter she'd burned. She thought about "Yes, Papa." She thought about the kitchen table in Cheyenne, and the particular expression on her father's face when he'd told her the arrangement was made not cruel, just entirely without curiosity about what she thought. "How long has he been here?" she said. "Coach came in this morning," Tommy said. She went inside. She went to her room, the small room at the back that had become in 6 weeks genuinely hers, in the way that spaces become yours when you stop treating them as temporary. And she stood at the window for 1 full minute and breathed. Then she went back to the kitchen. Cade was there. He had heard Tommy's report. "You don't have to go to him," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm going anyway. I'll come with you." "No," she said. And then, because the word came out too short, "Thank you. But this one I need to do myself. He's my father. Whatever that means. Whatever it's meant, and what it means now that conversation is mine." Cade looked at her. He didn't argue. "I'll be here when you get back," he said. She took the buckboard into Millhaven. Her father was in the hotel's small sitting room, the man Tommy had described beside him, a lawyer from Cheyenne. It turned out named Sellers, with a briefcase, and the practiced neutrality of someone hired to manage a situation rather than understand it. Franklin Pruitt stood when she came in. He looked older than she remembered, or perhaps she was seeing him differently, without the lens of the child she had been when he was the largest authority in her world. How was just a man, somewhat tired, not entirely certain she thought about what he'd come here expecting. "Eliza," he said. "Papa," she said. She sat down without waiting to be asked. She looked at Sellers. "Is he here legally or personally?" Sellers cleared his throat. "Mr. Pruitt has engaged me regarding the original contract with Mr. Briggs and the possibility of—" "I'm asking my father," she said. She looked at Franklin Pruitt directly. "Are you here because Briggs paid you to come, or are you here because you're my father?" A silence. Sellers looked at his briefcase. Franklin Pruitt looked at his daughter. "Both," he said. Finally. At least he was honest. "How much did he pay you?" she said. Her father's jaw moved. "That's not—" "How much?" she said. $50, he said, quietly. "For travel expenses and— he paid you $50 to come here and pressure me to drop the legal case against him and return to his property." She said it very clearly. Not with anger, she had thought she would be angry, and she found she wasn't, or at least not primarily. What she was primarily was tired of the particular shape of this. "Papa, he is going to lose. The document he filed is fraudulent. We have a dead man's name on a witness line. We have the territorial surveyor willing to testify. We have a pastor and a former land surveyor and a water rights registration predating every claim Briggs has made." She kept her eyes on her father's face. "He is going to lose. And whatever he paid you to come here is money you took from a man who thought you could move me." Franklin Pruitt looked at her. His expression moved through several things she watched but didn't try to name. "You've changed," he said. "I've been exactly this person the whole time," she said. "You just didn't ask." He was quiet for a long moment. Sellers was looking at the window. "The Whitmore man," her father said. Is this about him?" "It's about me," she said. "It started being about me the morning I got on the stagecoach to come here. It has only ever been about me." "Eliza." Her father's voice shifted. Something in it that she hadn't heard before. Not authority, not management. Something more unsteady. "I thought I was doing right by you. I want you to know that. I thought a man with land and income, I thought that was what a woman needed. I needed someone to ask me what I needed," she said. That's all. That's the whole of it. He looked at his hands. I don't know how to fix that, he said. I'm not asking you to fix it, she said. I'm asking you to go home. Pay Mr. Sellers out of your own money and go home. And if you want to know what I'm doing and how I'm doing, you could write a letter. Not to demand something, just to ask. She stood. She picked up her bag. Don't come back here for Briggs, she said. If you come back, come for me. She walked out of the hotel and into the July afternoon, and she breathed the air of the street, and she did not cry, which she had half expected to do, and then she got in the buckboard and drove back to Whitmore Ridge. Delaney filed the fraud complaint with the Territorial Court in Helena on Monday morning. The complaint went in with the death record, the web testimony, the water rights registration, George Colton's statement, Pastor Holloway's signed declaration, and Eliza's 22-page chronological documentation of every relevant transaction in the Valley from 1861 to 1879. The county commission's ratification of Briggs's claim, which Briggs had pushed through on Friday in the narrow window before the weekend, was flagged by the Territorial Court within 48 hours as under review pending fraud investigation. The water claim was suspended. Delaney sent a message to the ranch that said simply, "Hold, we're moving." Cade read it at the kitchen table. He read it twice. Then he set it down and pressed both hands flat against the tabletop and held that position for a moment. Eliza watched him. She didn't say anything. My father spent his whole life on that creek, Cade said. His voice was quiet, not unsteady, just carrying something heavy and putting it down carefully. He built the water channel by hand, him and 2 hired men one summer. He was 40 years old. I used to watch him work it when I was a boy, and I thought it was the most permanent thing I'd ever seen. It held, she said. It held, he said. He looked up at her. We're not done yet, he said. Briggs will challenge the suspension. The Territorial Court will want to hear arguments. Delaney will be ready, she said. Delaney's good, he said. But you built what he's arguing from. She looked at him steadily. We built it, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. We built it, he said. The word we sat between them. Not a claim, not a declaration. Just a word that had become true through the ordinary accumulation of days and work and honesty, and choosing each morning to keep choosing, and both of them knew it, and neither of them felt the need to say it louder than that. Tommy came in from outside, read the atmosphere of the room with the accuracy he'd developed over weeks of paying attention, and said, Should I make supper? Or, Yes, Cade said. Make supper. Tommy nodded and went to the stove with the satisfied air of someone who understood that a normal evening was the most affirmative thing available. The deposition from August Webb arrived by post on Wednesday, 12 handwritten pages from a man in Butte who had clearly spent his retirement doing very little and had redirected that accumulated energy into the most thorough possible account of every land transaction he had witnessed in the Millhaven Valley between 1865 and 1878. He named dates, parties, witnesses, locations. He referenced his own filed records, which he had kept in his personal possession and which he offered to produce in person at whatever court required them. He also included a personal note at the bottom, addressed to no one specific. Tell whoever is fighting this that they have the truth. The truth in land cases is rarer than it should be. Protect it. Eliza read the note 3 times. She put the deposition with the rest of the documentation. She made a note on her master chronology. She closed the folder. Then she went out to the kitchen garden, the one she'd been clearing and planting since the 2nd week, and she knelt beside the lavender rows, and she looked at what had come up. It was sparse, uneven. Several seeds had not taken at all, but in 3 distinct places along the row, there were small green shoots standing upright in the afternoon heat, thin and new and entirely real. She heard boots on the path behind her. She didn't turn around. Cade crouched beside her. He looked at the shoots. The ones on the left are strongest, he said. I know, she said. Milner said they might not take. He was only partly right, she said. Cade was quiet for a moment. He reached out and very gently touched the soil beside the nearest shoot. Not the plant itself, just the earth around it. The way you check something you want to verify is real without risking disturbing it. Eliza, he said. She turned and looked at him. He was close enough that the distance between them was no longer the careful professional distance of early days, but the closer range of people who have stopped pretending the proximity isn't there. I know I'm not an easy man, he said. I know I'm quiet where I should talk and gone in my head when I should be present. And I spent 4 years after Margaret left making sure I didn't need anything from anyone. He met her eyes. I'm telling you that so you know I know it, not as an excuse. I'm not looking for easy, she said. I know, he said. That's why I'm saying this. Because you of all people deserve to know what you're... He stopped. What you'd be choosing, if you choose. She looked at him. She thought about the morning she'd stepped off the stagecoach in Millhaven, afraid and alone, and already decided even then that she was not going back. She thought about the room with the window the size of a book. She thought about his voice in the early morning. You need anything. She thought about coffee and beans on the stove, and a door that locked from the inside, and 22 pages of documentation and lavender in the ground, and a man crouching beside her in the afternoon, asking her to know what she was choosing. I know what I'm choosing, she said. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he reached out slowly, deliberately giving her every chance to decide, and took her hand from where it rested on the garden soil and held it. His hand was calloused and warm and steady. She held it back. Neither of them said anything else for a while. The Montana summer pressed its heat down around them. The lavender shoots stood in their row, uneven and new and stubbornly alive. And somewhere above the ridgeline, a hawk rode a thermal in a slow circle, and the afternoon held them both without asking anything of them, except that they be exactly where they were, inside the house. Tommy was making noise with pots that was slightly louder than necessary, which was his way of telling them he was very much occupied with supper and not paying any attention whatsoever. Eliza looked at the lavender shoots. They're going to need more water, she said. I'll set Tommy on it in the morning, Cade said. I can do it, she said. You can do it, he agreed. So can Tommy. You don't have to do everything yourself. She turned that over. It was not a criticism. It was something gentler than that, an offer maybe, or a small correction to a habit she'd built out of necessity that she no longer had to carry alone. All right, she said. Tommy can do the watering. He squeezed her hand once. He stood. He helped her up. They walked back to the house together, and the evening settled around them like something earned. The letter from the territorial court arrived on a Tuesday, which was the same day of the week Eliza had first stepped off the stagecoach in Millhaven. She noticed that. She didn't know what to do with the noticing except hold it the particular symmetry of a thing beginning and a thing resolving on the same day of the week, as if the calendar itself had opinions about closure. Delaney brought it in person. He rode up the lane to Whitmore Ridge in the early afternoon with his leather case under his arm, and the particular walk of a man who is carrying good news, but is too professional to let it show on his face before he's in the room. Eliza was at the kitchen table when he came in. Cade was beside her. Tommy had positioned himself near the stove with the transparent pretense of making coffee that nobody had asked for. Delaney sat down. He opened the case. He produced the letter and laid it on the table. Territorial court has ruled, he said. The Briggs water claim is invalidated in full. The fraudulent deed has been referred to the county prosecutor's office for criminal review. August Webb's testimony was accepted as definitive on the question of the 1870 transfer. The Whitmore Water Rights Registration of 1871 stands as the controlling document. He looked at Cade. The creek is yours. It was always yours. The record now says so clearly enough that nobody will challenge it again. The kitchen was very quiet. Cade put both hands flat on the table. He looked at the letter. He didn't reach for it immediately, just looked at it the way you look at something you've been fighting for long enough that its arrival feels slightly unreal. The criminal referral, Eliza said. What does that mean for Briggs? It means the prosecutor will decide whether to pursue fraud charges, Delaney said. Given the evidence, a dead man's name on a witness line, a surveyor's testimony, a pastor's declaration. I'd expect them to pursue it. Whether it results in conviction depends on the prosecutor and the judge and the particular mood of Montana justice this season. He folded his hands on the table. But his standing in this county is finished regardless of what the prosecutor decides. A man who files a fraudulent land claim and gets caught at it doesn't recover from that in a place this size. The Land Commission has already removed him from the advisory board. I heard that this morning before I rode out. Tommy made a sound from the stove that was not quite a word, and turned back to the coffee with his shoulders doing something that suggested he was working very hard to keep his reaction private. Eliza looked at Cade. He was still looking at the letter on the table. Then he picked it up. He read it not quickly but carefully, the way he read everything all the way through to the end. Then he set it down and looked at Delaney. Thank you, he said, for coming fast, for the work you did. Thank the woman sitting next to you, Delaney said pleasantly. The chronological documentation she built was the cleanest case presentation I've put in front of a territorial court in 20 years of practice. The judge said so. I'm quoting him. He looked at Eliza with the direct appreciation of a man who gives credit where it has been precisely earned. You have a gift for finding the weight-bearing element in a complicated structure and making it visible. If you ever find yourself in need of work, come to Bozeman. I mean that without humor. Eliza looked at him. I have work, she said. I know, he said. I'm saying it anyway. He stayed for coffee. The coffee Tommy had produced with such pointed industry, and he and Cade talked through the follow-up steps with the practical efficiency of men closing out a job, and Eliza listened and contributed where she had something specific to add and stayed quiet where she didn't, which was its own kind of new thing, the ability to be in a room and not feel she had to fill it. When Delaney left, she walked him to his horse. Will Briggs come after the ranch again? She asked. Delaney put his foot in the stirrup and settled into the saddle before he answered. He looked down at her. A man like Briggs moves to another county, he said. Finds new ground, new arrangements. He's not going to spend more effort here. It costs him more than he'd gain, and he knows it. He picked up his reins. You made the right calls, Miss Pruitt. Every one of them. He tipped his hat and rode. She stood in the yard and listened to the hoofbeats fade and felt something she had no clean word for. Not triumph exactly. Triumph was too loud. This was quieter. More like the feeling of setting down something heavy that you'd been carrying for so long you'd forgotten it was weight. The town found out within a day. Of course it did. What she hadn't expected was how it would change the quality of air in Millhaven when she went in on Thursday for supplies. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. But she felt it in the way Milner met her eyes directly when she came to the counter. In the way two men outside the saloon, who had previously looked through her, looked at her instead, in the way Martha Colton crossed the full width of the road, specifically to take her hand and say quietly and with real feeling, I'm glad you stayed. I want you to know that. Thank you, Martha, she said. George says Cade's father would have been proud, Martha said. Of the whole business. The documentation, the fight, the whole of it. Eliza held that for a moment. That means something, she said. Tell George I said so. She went about her errands, and she felt for the first time since arriving in Montana territory that the ground under her feet in this particular town was not contested. It was not a small thing. The harder conversation, the one she had been aware was coming without being able to predict its exact shape, happened on Friday evening. Cade had been quiet in the way he got quiet when he was carrying something he hadn't decided how to say yet. She had learned the difference between his ordinary quietness, which was just the texture of how he moved through the world, and the quietness that meant there was something underneath. This was the second kind. She gave it room. She waited. After supper, Tommy vanished with the strategic efficiency he had perfected, and they were alone on the porch in the cooling evening, and Cade set down his coffee cup and turned to look at her with the direct, unperformed honesty that she had come to understand was simply how he was when he was being serious. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want you to know that whatever the answer is, it doesn't change anything about your position here. Your work, your room, your place on this ranch. None of that is conditional on what you say. She looked at him. All right, she said. I want to ask you to marry me, he said. Not as an arrangement. Not because of the situation or the legal complications or what it would look like to the county. Because I want to. He held her gaze steadily. Because you walked through those pine trees 6 weeks ago, and in 6 weeks you have... He stopped. Started again. You found a 20-year-old document that saved this ranch. You stood on this porch and told Harlan Briggs no twice to his face. You planted lavender because I said my mother grew it, and I didn't know you'd remembered that. He paused. I notice everything, Eliza. I don't say it enough, but I notice. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the marriage certificate she had burned in the stove. She thought about the word arrangement and how it had felt like a brand against her skin. She thought about her father's kitchen table, and yes, Papa, and the room with the window the size of a book. She thought about all the ways a question could be asked and all the ways she had been denied the chance to answer. Ask me again, she said. The way you mean it. He understood immediately. He held her eyes. Eliza Pruitt, he said, will you marry me? Yes, she said. I will. He reached out and took her hand the same way he had in the garden, deliberate and unhurried, and held it, and neither of them felt the need to say anything else, because everything necessary had already been said, and the evening held them both in the particular piece of people who have arrived somewhere real. What she had not expected was her father's letter. It came 10 days later, after the engagement, after Tommy had responded to the news with the contained joy of someone trying very hard to be dignified about something. He was clearly delighted by, after Martha Colton had appeared with a practical gift of good kitchen linen, and the assurance that she would handle whatever the town needed to understand about the situation. It came without announcement in the ordinary post, in Franklin Pruitt's handwriting. Cramped, careful, the handwriting of a man who had taught himself to write as an adult, and never quite lost the self-consciousness of it. It was not a long letter. Her father was still not a man who used more words than he felt were necessary. But it was different from the first one in a way that she felt before she had read past the second line. He did not mention Briggs. He did not mention the arrangement or the contract or the $50 or any of the machinery of the situation that had brought her here. He asked how she was. He said the house in Cheyenne was very quiet. He said he had spoken to a neighbor woman who had lost her husband the previous spring, and the woman had said something to him that he had been thinking about. She had said that she missed most, not the man's presence, but the fact of being known by someone. Franklin Pruitt wrote that he had thought about this for some days and had concluded that he had not done enough to know his daughter. He said he would like to if she was willing. He said he heard from the postal clerk that there had been some legal business in Millhaven involving the ranch she was staying at and that it had resolved in her favor. He said, I expect you handled it. Not, I'm proud of you. Her father was not there yet. But I expect you handled it from Franklin. Pruitt was the closest thing to it he had ever managed, and she recognized it for what it was. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter for a long time. Cade came in from outside and saw her face and sat down across from her and waited. My father wrote, she said. Good or bad, she considered the question honestly. Different, she said. Better than I expected. Not everything I wished for. Somewhere in between. That's most things, he said. Yes, she said. It is. She folded the letter carefully. She would write back. Not today. She needed a day to find the right words, the ones that told the truth without either closing the door entirely or pretending the door had always been open. But she would write back. She looked at Cade across the table. He said he expects I handled it, she said. Cade looked at her. You did, he said. We did, she said. He accepted this without argument. We did, he agreed. The wedding happened on the last Saturday of August, which was later than either of them had originally discussed, but turned out to be exactly right, because by then the lavender had come fully in sparse in some rows, dense in others, improbable and real, and smelling of something Eliza had no category for, except this is what I chose. Pastor Holloway, performed the ceremony with the warm efficiency of a man who had married people for 30 years and understood that what mattered in a wedding was not the ceremony, but the decision behind it, whether both people were standing there freely, whether both of them meant it, whether the thing being built would hold. Tommy stood beside Cade with the seriousness of someone given a responsibility he intended to honor completely. Martha Colton and George were there. Delaney had sent a letter that arrived the morning of the ceremony, which contained one line of congratulations and one line of the practical. The prosecutor has accepted the fraud case. It will be heard in October. Your presence will not be required. She read it before the ceremony and felt something she recognized as the particular satisfaction of a thing completed cleanly. When Holloway reached the moment in the ceremony where he asked if there was a reason these two people should not be married, there was a silence so quiet and so complete that the sound of a hawk calling somewhere above the ridgeline was audible in it. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved. Then Holloway said, "I didn't think so," in the dry tone of a man who had been waiting for years for someone to finally just ask Harlan Briggs the same question. And something moved through the small gathering, not quite laughter, but the feeling of something released. When Cade took her hand, at the moment the ceremony required it, he held it exactly the way he'd held it in the garden and on the porch. Deliberate, unhurried, like a man who has decided something and is committed to the decision. She held his hand back with the same steadiness. They looked at each other. She thought 6 weeks ago, I had one bag and no plan, and I walked through a set of pine trees because a man I had met for 30 seconds in an early morning had said, "You need anything?" and I believed him. She thought that is the whole story. All the rest of it is what happened because I believed him. She said "I do" in a voice that was clear and carried no qualification. He said "I do" in the quiet, direct way he said everything that he meant. Holloway pronounced them married. Tommy forgot his composure entirely and made a sound that was approximately a cheer, and Martha Colton pressed her handkerchief to her eyes with the practiced grace of a woman who had been waiting to do exactly that. And George Colton shook Cade's hand with both of his and said something too low for Eliza to hear that made Cade's face do the thing adjacent to a smile. What nobody tells you about the end of a fight is how quiet it gets. She had been braced for so long, tensed against the next threat, the next letter, the next horse at the edge of the yard, that the absence of it took some adjusting. The first week after the wedding, she woke twice in the night, certain that something was wrong, and lay in the dark, cataloging her actual situation before she could settle back into sleep. The threat had been real long enough that her body had memorized it. The body takes longer than the mind to understand when a thing is over. Cade noticed. He noticed the way he noticed everything without announcement, without turning it into an occasion. He simply stayed close in the ways that helped. He made coffee before she was fully awake. He left the morning work that was hers to do as hers without taking over, because he understood. She understood that. He understood that the ownership of her own mornings was not a small thing to her, and he would not diminish it by managing it. She caught him one morning standing at the kitchen window, looking at the garden with an expression she hadn't seen before. She came and stood beside him. The lavender was full now, not the sparse, uncertain shoots of early summer, but something real and established moving slightly in the morning air. "Your mother's lavender," she said. "Our lavender," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden with something in his face that was tender and entirely unguarded. The expression of a man who has lowered a shield he'd been carrying so long he'd half forgotten it was there. She put her hand through his arm. He covered her hand with his without looking away from the garden. They stood there for a while, the morning coming in through the window, the ranch moving into its day around them. October brought the frost and the news from Delaney in the same week. The frost came first, the first hard one earlier than expected, arriving overnight and leaving the world with the crystalline quiet of a thing transformed. Eliza checked the lavender first thing in the morning before coffee still in her shawl. The established plants had held. The newest shoots at the far end of the row had not. She stood over them for a moment and felt the ordinary grief of a small loss, and then she went inside and wrote a note to add more seed in the spring. Not all things survived their first hard frost. The ones that did came back stronger. Delaney's letter came 3 days later. The fraud case had been heard in the territorial court in Helena. Harlan Briggs had entered a guilty plea on the lesser charge of fraudulent filing. His lawyer had negotiated it. Delaney wrote, which suggested Briggs had looked at the evidence against him and made the only rational decision available. He had been fined, substantially removed permanently from any county land commission in Montana Territory, and required to issue a formal retraction of the water rights claim to be entered into the public record. He had already left Mill Haven. His property was being sold. Delaney's final line said, "The record is clean. The creek is yours. Go live your life." Eliza read the letter at the kitchen table, and then she read it again, and then she set it down on top of a folder that held the 1871 water rights registration, and August Webb's 12-page deposition, and the death record for James Carver, and 22 pages of chronological documentation she had built on 4 days of short sleep. She closed the folder. She put the folder in the chest where Cade's father had kept his documents. She latched the chest. Then she went outside. Cade was at the corral fence, watching the horses move in the October morning. She came and stood beside him. He had heard her come, but he didn't turn. Just made room for her at the fence rail, without words, which was its own language, one she had learned and trusted. She put her arms on the rail beside his. "It's over," she said. "Delaney's letter. Guilty plea. He's left Mill Haven." Cade was quiet for a moment. He watched the horses. "Good," he said. "Just that. Good. Without embellishment, without drama. The word of a man who doesn't need a thing to be bigger than it is." She thought about the morning she'd arrived in this valley, the July heat, the stagecoach, the way the town had looked at her like she was a problem needing to be sorted. She thought about the marriage certificate against her skin, and the room with the tiny window, and Harlan Briggs's hand on her wrist, and "Yes, Papa," and all the weight she'd been carrying then that she had set down piece by piece over the course of a summer. She thought about lavender seeds that Milner said might not take. "Tommy's asking about spring planting," Cade said. "He wants to expand the kitchen garden. He's gotten attached to it." "Tommy can expand anything he likes," she said. "Tell him to add a second lavender row on the south side. The light's better there." Cade looked at her. Something in his face was warm and unhurried and entirely present. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She looked at him sharply. He was doing the thing adjacent to a smile. "Don't call me ma'am," she said. "Eliza," he said. "Better." He turned back to the horses. She stayed at the fence beside him. The October morning moved around them cold and clear, and carrying the particular smell of a season changing, of something ending, and something else preparing to begin. She thought about the word home. She had grown up in a house and called it home because that was what you called the place you lived. She had understood for the first time standing in Harlan Briggs's bare kitchen 2 days after arriving in Montana what it felt like when the word was wrong. When the place didn't fit the word, and the word didn't fit the place, and there was nothing in between but the knowledge that you were somewhere you did not belong. She understood now, standing at this fence rail in October, what it felt like when the word was right. It didn't feel the way she would have predicted. It didn't feel like arrival. It felt like something quieter than that, like the difference between holding your breath and breathing, like the difference between bracing and resting. Like the first morning you wake up and your first thought is, not "what do I need to defend today?" but simply, "it's morning and the morning is yours." "Cade," she said. "Your father did good work," she said. "With this place, with the documents and the creek and all of it." He was quiet for a moment. "He did," he said. "You've done good work too," she said. "Keeping it." He looked at her sideways. "We've kept it," he said. She held his eyes. "We've kept it," she agreed. The horses moved in the corral. The frost-stiffened grass held the morning light. Somewhere above the ridge, the hawk rode its thermal in the slow, patient circle of something that had learned to trust the air beneath it, and Eliza Whitmore stood at the fence of a ranch that was hers, and breathed in the October cold, and felt not the tentative provisional feeling of someone waiting for the ground to shift, but the deep, steady feeling of someone who has found the thing they were looking for and recognized it and stayed. She had come here in fear on a stagecoach. She hadn't chosen with a name on a document that wasn't her choice, and a life arranged by someone else's hands. She had walked out of that arrangement through a stand of pine trees with one bag and nothing guaranteed. She had found a man who said you need anything and meant it without conditions. She had found the documentation that saved a ranch. She had found her own voice in a sheriff's doorway, on a hotel sitting room sofa in a county land office, in her own chest, where it had been waiting a long time to be used. She had found lavender growing in October ground that wasn't supposed to hold it. She had found at the end of the summer what she had not known she was looking for when she stepped off that stagecoach. Not rescue, not safety, not someone to carry the weight. Just this. A person standing beside her at a fence rail in the morning, looking at the same things, breathing the same cold air, steady and present and chosen. Two broken people did not become one whole person by finding each other. She knew that now, in a way, she hadn't known it before. You stayed broken in all your original places. The breaks didn't fill, but you found someone whose breaks didn't match yours, whose solid places were where yours were thin, and you stood beside each other, and the two of you together made something more complete than either of you had been. That was not a fairy tale. That was not a rescue. That was the real thing, the only kind that held. Cade reached over without looking away from the horses and took her hand where it rested on the fence rail. His grip was warm and certain, and asked nothing except that she hold on back. She held on. The morning opened wide around them, cold and bright, and entirely theirs, and the mountains rose at their backs, enormous and permanent, keeping watch over a valley where a woman had once arrived, trembling and afraid, and had chosen against every pressure and every voice that told her she did not have the right to choose to stay. She stayed, and the ground held.